Hello, welcome to our program. This is the Freethought Forum, and it's sponsored by the East Tennessee Rationalists and the Atheist Society of Knoxville. I'm Joe Barnhart, and welcome.
And I'm John Clark, and we want you to know that if you do not believe in God, you are not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and for people committed to a life rooted in science and free of supernatural beliefs.
Okay, and also, if you don't agree with us, you're welcome too, because all of us need to be informed from different perspectives.
That's right.
Program today is using reason to resolve conflicts, or if you want to, you can call it strategy of thinking or secular strategy, whatever strategy that brings in reason. That's what we're going to talk about today. Yep. So,
but first, let's tell you a little bit about the sponsors of our show. The Atheist Society of Knoxville frequently has a meetup at Barley's in the Old City around 5:30. Just look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table. And as Matt Dillahunty at the Atheist Experience says, everyone is welcome to our happy hour for food, drink, and conversation. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, or provoke, please don't.
Okay, now the Rationalists of East Tennessee has several regular monthly meetings, first and third Sunday meetings. Mornings of the month of usually lectures and lively roundtable discussion. The second Sunday usually is a book club, Skeptic Book Club.
Oh, I've got the book.
Go ahead.
Right up here. It's going to be The Divide, American Injustice in the Age of the Wealth Gap by Matt, and I'm going to say his name is Tybee, but that's going to be Sunday, November 9th, 2 p.m. at Barnes & Noble Booksellers on Kingston Pike.
Yeah, whatever your metaphysical outlook on life is, this book would be very interesting to read. And then and this often has potluck to go with it on the fourth Sunday, or the second, depending on what Sunday it is, and sometimes board games and just good fellowship.
Later on in the show, we're going to give you our websites for additional details, including times and locations. But our next segment, we're going to go into the news. If some of you have been paying attention to some local atheist news, you know that on the 15th, Barry Hazel of Northern California was awarded about $2 million after the state and a nonprofit drug rehab organization violated his religious liberty. Now, Hazel had spent about a year behind bars for possession of methamphetamines and was ordered to enroll in a residential drug treatment program. The program that he ended up enrolling in was at the Empire Recovery Center, and they used a 12-step program, and it was, from what I understand, based off of Alcoholics Anonymous programs. And this included a submission to a higher power during a prayer. In 2007, Hazel sued both California State Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation and West Care, California. In 2010, it was found that his rights had been violated, but the jury did not award for any damages. And 2011, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ordered a retrial. And yes, on the 15th, his lawyers reached a settlement, $2 million from both the state and West Care, California. So that just kind of goes as a reminder that if you're going to send someone to rehab, if it's going to be a court order, that if the person requests, and he had requested not to be a part of the religious portion, he wanted to be exempt from it, and his parole officer had stated, well, there's no one else in town. This is the only approved method.
They could have.
They could have easily,
And if the guy doing it was a counselor at all, he ought to know what adaptability is. That's part of the training and counseling. I mean, that's first grade level. And
I should mention that he had, the reason he sued was because he got sent back to prison for not participating in the religious portion of that program.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Otherwise, just because they disagreed with it, that's not a basis for giving him a lot of money. It's because they put him back into prison for it.
Yeah, it was about 100 days, too. I mean, it wasn't in there for a short period of time.
They were wrong to do that. I mean, and he was right to protest. He needed help. I mean, he made a bad mistake of getting into drugs in the first place.
Right.
And then to get into prison, which didn't do him much good in the second place, and then to put him into some kind of religion program that's not his religion and force him to do it, it was wrong. And it wasn't helping him at all.
Yeah, I think some of the words, this is him quoting his parole officer, stated that, well, you can pick any God. We're not very specific about him. Or not his parole officer, but the program.
Yeah.
And in fact, just whatever it takes to get you through the program, and we'll check the box. And he's like, no, I still don't want to do that.
Yeah,
so
that's like praying to whom it may concern. Okay, we go ahead. We've got a good guest on with us today, so we.
Oh yeah, did we introduce our guest? I don't think we did.
No, we haven't.
Go ahead and introduce our guest.
Well, Dr. Phil Hamlin, who's been a professor for many years, and I'd like you to tell us what you taught.
I taught a variety of courses at the University of Tennessee between, I think, 1964 and about 2008 or 9. I'm now retired. Major interests: philosophy of religion, aesthetics, philosophy of literature, also ethics, medical ethics, and environmental ethics.
And you taught moral philosophy.
Yeah, moral philosophy, moral issues, contemporary moral issues. An interesting course, and also courses in the history of philosophy.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right, let me see if I can set this up for our show. We had a viewer request on our Facebook page, and that's a public page, by the way. Freethought Forum Knoxville, is that the name? Yep, I'm pretty sure that's it. But requested information on the Oklahoma Satanic Monument. And so this is an ongoing thing, but it's not quite current news. It's recent.
Go ahead.
And so what had happened is in 2009, Southern Baptist deacon Mike Ritzie, a representative Oklahoma state legislator, donated a Ten Commandments monument to the Capitol Preservation Commission there in Oklahoma. Bruce Prescott, a Baptist minister, not an atheist, not a Satanist, not any of this stuff, was offended when he saw the monument during one of his visits. And according to him, he stated, it's inappropriate, it's not the right place. Put it on the doorpost, that's what the Bible says. It doesn't say to put it on the state capitol. So he appealed to the ACLU, and the ACLU filed a lawsuit in August of 2013. The monument stands alone with no other monuments or memorials in the immediate vicinity, and it is exclusionary. That it supports and endorses faiths and creeds of some churches and sects, and then of course there's nothing else there, so it's not necessarily denying those things, but it's showing endorsement, state endorsement of one over the others. As
our guest speaker knows, this Baptist minister knew his Baptist history.
Yeah, we're gonna get into that. And so, you know, as soon as I said this, I wonder how many people at home, I wonder if the person who had requested for us to go over that knew that it was, at first, it was a Baptist minister or a deacon complaining. This is somebody who's concerned about the way religion and government are getting entangled, and for valid reasons, for himself, historical reasons as well.
Okay, Phil, you remember in reading and teaching the history of this, how the Baptists got to be the promoters early of church-state separation.
Yeah, if I remember right, it was Roger Williams who was one of their leaders, and he led a number of Christians out of other communities who wanted to practice their religion in their own way.
And John Lee
wanted religious freedom.
Yeah, that's both in England and then in New England.
Yeah, and at one time, I think maybe Roger Williams was the first proponent of what we would call religious freedom.
Yeah, he and
colonies.
He and John Leland, and of course, in some ways, you could say John Bunyan.
Yeah,
who spent a few days in jail for his religion. We sometimes forget a lot of religious people put other religious people in jail.
Yeah,
because they.
True.
And sometimes they murdered.
Yes.
It uses the state as a means to do it, but it's still murder, it seems to me, in the name of God.
Or some God.
Some God, yeah. Their
so
God.
When you tell me this, and I'm going to turn the clock back for myself just a little bit, when I didn't understand, I didn't know what you just said. And I would have said, you mean to tell me that the same church that I go to, the one that wants to put the Ten Commandments on the courthouse, the one that wants to entangle government and religion, or not the same, but that it has ties to groups. And in fact, strong support came previously from Baptist for church-state separation. So why would that be?
When I was growing up Baptist, we had to study Baptist history in college.
Right.
And that's where I learned even more, not only in church, but even more in the Baptist college, of church-state separation. That's called the priesthood of all believers. In other words, every believer has his own or her own conscience. And so you don't need a priesthood or a government telling you what's right and wrong. You can have other people giving you some traditions, and if they make sense, you stay with them.
Right.
And that's what but mostly you get that in your families. You're raised properly, and then your school teachers support you. But you certainly don't need the state, and this is what these early Baptists and Quakers were saying, is you don't need the government declaring what's moral and immoral, because that comes first from the people. That's government of the people, not corporations, people. And then that's what goes into the laws, namely a law to make people have a right to conscience. And the laws then are developed to make that possible. That's why you keep a law against killing.
Right. So I'm going to take on the view of some of our listeners that might be confused, as I was. So you mean to tell me that Southern Baptist Deacon Mike Ritz, the guy who donated the Ten Commandment monument to the government property, how do we get to today? How do we get to this point where this man feels it's appropriate? Now, of course, he's Southern Baptist, so maybe there's an explanation. We need to explain what that means compared to Baptist. But how do we get to where we are today?
As I understand it, the Southern Baptists broke off from the National Baptist Church over the issue of slavery in the Civil War. But maybe our conversation so far has left out a really important thing about religion and all kinds of religion. That is that no religion stays the same through time.
Right.
Religions respond to conditions and personalities and crises and so on in their own way. And if you go back and read how the very early Christians practiced their Christianity, you would find it mind-boggling, because it's so radically different from what we see in Christian practice today. But that's true of all religions. Human beings seem to be incapable of figuring out a way to do religion and keeping it exactly that way indefinitely.
Okay,
and we can't do it with anything else either. It would seem to be unreasonable to expect it to stay the same. One of the real tests, though, several people have suggested in the history of thought, is if you want to really test whether or not a religion believes in religious freedom, it's not when they're a minority, because minority religions always believe in religious freedom. It's when they're in a majority. What happens when they become the majority religion? Do they still respect religious freedom that they fought for before? Or do they then use their representation in the halls of power to force their religious point of view?
And it was Charles Spurgeon, a London minister in Victorian England, who brought this point up.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, well, let me continue on with our satanic monument. Kind of tell, because I do want to honor the viewer's request to go into some detail about it.
Was the monument supposed to be for the worship of Satan or something?
All right, so
they choose Satan as God? I mean, I don't really understand.
I don't understand that either. If we have a Satanist watching the show, or I guess it would be Church of Satan. I've got the actual name of the organization. But,
First Church of Satan?
Okay, it's not against the law to be ridiculous. Okay? Otherwise, most of us wouldn't be here.
Right.
At one time or another.
There is certainly some satire going on in this event. What happened was somebody started a startup group or a Kickstarter campaign. I don't think it was Kickstarter, but they managed to raise about $30,000 for this statue. And this is after, the ACLU has now filed suit wanting, you're going to represent all of them, or you're going to, you need to remove this, something along those lines. And in the meantime now, we've got a proposition to put up this statue.
Well, your point is if you're going to have the Satanists and you're going to have the Christians and the Jews and you're going to have a diversity among the Christians,
right?
Then you're going to have the Hindus and the Buddhists.
Well, and we're getting to the best part of this. So first, the criticism, and this seems to be the criticism, especially if you go to, well, actually, if you go to any major news website, I read through the comments. It's about the same. This is ridiculous. I mean, you just throw anything up there. It's like the Pabst Blue Ribbon that was in Florida for last year, and I believe it was a Christmas type celebration.
A monument to beer.
This was a Festivus for the rest of us. It's that started with Seinfeld. I want to say about 20 years, less than 20 years ago, but sometime around there. Anyhow, and the first thing is, well, you're just poking. You're just making fun. Oh man, one of Fox News' contributors, Father Jonathan Morris, he said, as soon as you connect yourself with evil, evil stuff happens. Do they have a political right to do it? Yes. But does the city also have responsibility to defend the governance of its people? Yes. And then he goes on to make this analogy that these Satanists, or putting up this this monument, which is counter to, or right in the face of, for him, Catholic doctrine.
This is the church which had committed a number of murders in the Middle Ages.
Well, right. But he said this was like yelling fire in a crowded theater, that this incites violence.
Well, no, it doesn't.
And let's, I want to play around with that for just a moment.
Go ahead.
Let's say I wanted to incite violence in neutral state territory. Well, I'd put a religious monument up. That's one way to do it, because now I'm showing favoritism. Well, who did that? Somebody got that there in the first place. That's all I'm saying. And it's neutral territory.
Would you think this is to put up a? I mean, you could say this. I was in a church recently, and a certain member of the church said, "I did not like the minister saying to the children, 'What would Jesus do?' Because she says, I don't think we get our real teachings about morality from Jesus." And she was offended. Now, she would not have been violent. But my point is, some people get offended, and that's okay. It's another thing to be violent. But to have disagreement doesn't mean that you are provoking violence. And the priest was dead wrong about
Oh, right.
this.
Yeah, definitely wrong about that part.
And furthermore, he did not resort to violence himself. But now I want to ask our guest speaker.
Yeah.
Phil, John Wesley and Calvin and Luther are all Protestants, and they have differences among themselves on this. How do you explain all the differences? To say nothing of differences among Catholics, like Anselm and Abelard, for example. How do we explain all that?
Well, this is a question for which you need a wise person to answer it, and I don't regard myself as one. But I suspect a factor in it is that people don't all read the scriptures and understand them the same way. They don't all understand what practice of their understanding of religion requires. They have heard differences in opinions articulated by other people of good heart, and they think those people are, you listen to them. Incidentally, you're talking about the satanic statue we have over in Anderson County, a more local example of putting In God We Trust over the courthouse door,
Right.
which was working around last year or year before.
And I guess Blount County as well now, right? No?
Yeah. But anyhow, we're doing this.
Roane County. Sorry.
Yeah, so where do all these differences come from? Well, they come from people thinking about what they've been told, trying to apply, say, religious principles to life, and trying to figure out what those principles require that they do and believe. And the interesting question, though, is why some people do resort to violence or resort to law to enforce their point of view about it. That's the troublesome part.
That sounds more like an in-group, out-group mentality. I mean, people, we band together. You see, it's like a clan.
Right.
Like clan.
But the other factor too is that some people are convinced that their religious point of view is the only correct one,
Right.
And therefore, people that don't share their view are incorrect, and they can be mistreated. Maybe they can be treated as second-class citizens. There have been a considerable number of people killed.
Well, would
for
you?
a reason. We see it going on in the Mideast right now.
Usually, you have to think if you can disagree with someone, really disagree, you first of all have to understand them, and that takes a lot of work.
It does.
And then to disagree does not mean that you can that you have a right to disrespect them as persons. Like you might think one of my views is dead wrong.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean you show me disrespect. In fact, if I am wrong and you can show it to me, you're just showing me respect.
Perhaps if we loved each other as we would like to be loved, we would practice that.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't you like someone to respect the difference you have with them? Treat you with respect?
Well, that's called marriage. A good marriage. I mean, I would not want to be married to a carbon copy of me. It would be
me neither.
Be boring. Also, I don't think I'm a carbon copy of myself of 10 years ago.
Yeah. You think there might be a difference in a photograph of the two times?
Well, I'm sure there is a difference.
But here's another point, though. You're talking about change. I mean, those of us in the group here who are a little older than the others can probably identify several times, several occasions, several experiences they've had in their life which changed them in some radical way.
Sure, yeah.
You know, and you might have a view now that you didn't have 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Exactly.
But I mean, doing violence to yourself because you changed your mind would be kind of strange. But why can't we respect difference in others?
If we can, and you're saying, if I'm understanding you, if we can disagree with our former self,
sure. Why can't we disagree
and
with
have
other
respect?
People? Sure.
Then why can't we do that with other people?
Exactly.
Yeah, it makes good sense.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think you got two things going on that you pointed out. Just what you've pointed out now, that you've got different interpretations, from different readings, and then depending certainly on the person's experience. All of that together, you've got at least a different interpretation to start off on, but that's not quite enough. The second one was you had the group going from a minority status to a majority status.
That's true, yeah.
And so let's combine those two things at once now, and now you have, let's say you've got a cultural explosion here where you can impact law and government and whatnot. And I think here, I guess towards the late 90s, you kind of saw this with the Ten Commandments. I mean, there's a lot of arguments out there that these things have been up for a long time, and in some courthouses that's certainly true, at least back to 50s and 60s, and perhaps sooner for others. But it's happened recently, and now, of course, you have our rational backlash. You know, you've got the ACLU and whatnot, people in here defending religious liberty. So those two things happened. But I was kind of curious, back to one of the previous points, you know, you still got this Baptist helped create, or at least added a great deal to this idea of church-state separation. And as soon as this majority status, along with all these little changes came along, it seems like they forgot who they were, you know.
Or they changed their mind.
Or they changed, yeah. Right.
After all, if you're promoting a point of view and it becomes widely accepted, then you're likely to think, boy, this is really working. People really understand this.
It's a good point.
I mean, the Lord is helping us convince these other people.
Right.
So then you might take a somewhat forceful attitude towards people that don't agree.
Well, right. We haven't gotten to violence yet, and now that you mention it, up until this point, we're not talking about anyone wanting violence or being intending to want violence. All right, I should choose my language carefully. We still haven't gotten there yet, but it certainly comes across at some point, and that's where you've got these in-group, out-groups, us versus them, and it gets carried away. It's going to get carried away anytime you have that. Enough of them happening over. We've got 300 million people here, so it's going to happen in little areas.
It may be a good thing to say about education. That one of the things about education, as over against just indoctrination, is education is multiple indoctrination. I want to emphasize that. It's good to indoctrinate students in one viewpoint. By indoctrinate, let them know in great detail what that view is. Yeah. And then indoctrinate them in another view, and another.
So they understand different points of view.
And then they can decide what makes sense by And you can do comparative analysis. There used to be taught what we call comparative religions.
It still exists.
And it's a good course.
Yeah.
And so you can study this religion, and then the students can make comparisons, and maybe they could say, well, the Buddhists have an interesting point that we had not thought of in this particular way. And then you could say, on the other hand, we don't think that makes sense. But then you reflect on your own view, and you say, well, we need to do a little revision on this. And
exactly.
And that's what an education has. And I wonder if we should have an elective course in comparative religions in high school. What do you think?
I think so. A guy named Prothero published a book years ago called Religious Literacy, which I think is really an interesting take in answering your question. He argues that an educated person ought to know about several religions and what those religions require of their believers.
Yeah.
And also he thinks that knowing that would make you more tolerant.
Well, I know one school in which is apparently one of the teachers is doing this with kids, maybe 13 or so.
Yeah.
And it seems to be working quite well.
Yeah.
And it makes them reflect. You know.
See, the interesting question is though, whether or not you could require that, because there are many people in our culture who strongly believe that their religion is the only one. Well, and they would be possibly hostile to the notion of a comparative religion.
What if you made an elective, like choir? Make an elective, like choir. Okay, we got a caller. Go ahead, caller. Go ahead, caller. Give us your name, would you?
This is Al.
Go ahead, Al. Let's hear what you got.
Well, first of all, there's only one Bible from the Greek Textus Receptus and the Hebrew Masoretic text, and that's the King James Bible. And it shows the immutability of God. God does not change.
Okay.
Jesus, the same yesterday, today, and forever. Malachi 3:6, the Lord changed not. God doesn't change on morality.
All right.
Like the world's changing on morality.
All right, go ahead.
And you're changing, and I'm changing.
Uh-huh.
God never changes.
Okay.
What was a sin 2,000 years ago is a sin today.
Okay, let me ask you a question. On your view, did God become man?
Did God become man? God, you said
let me ask you a question.
2 months ago was that man became God.
Let me ask you a question, and let me get a straight answer and not a sermon, okay?
But that's what you said 2 months ago.
Can God become man?
He did.
Okay, is that a change?
Hey, the world is spinning. It's changing.
Did God change?
Don't ask stupid questions.
You can't answer it, can you?
Don't ask stupid questions.
You know what?
Stay with the subject. Stay with the subject.
Okay, Al.
And the Baptist.
Okay, Al. I already know when you start using the word stupid, you run out of the ability to answer the question. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So we'll get back to you later.
Well, let me. It's a good time for us to just take a program break.
We'll get,
before we do, though, just want to remind the viewers that this is a call-in show. We just had good old Al online,
that's all right.
And we can have another caller here in a bit. Sam, if you want to set up our mid-program break, and we'll
have a
continue
break.
this.
Go ahead. Now.
Believes or simply believe in one less God than everyone else? Well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. On Fridays, we meet at Agave Azul or the Beard and Beer Market. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. Do you find stories of talking snakes laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets weekly for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org. If you live in or around the Knoxville area.
All right, and we're back. If you're just tuning in now, this is Freethought Forum. Well, actually, we just did the infomercial, so I can do without all that.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
We were talking about, today's topic is secular strategies. And we were talking about one of the strategies that's worked for us in the past regarding church-state separation and defending it. And that strategy, if I could just recap it quickly before we go on, is to request that the state not endorse a religion if it had, as an example of Oklahoma City has a Ten Commandments monument. We request that you take it down. When that request gets turned down, then you can either sue and go the church-state like lemon test route, or you can say. You could sue and you could say, well, or not sue, but you could then request, well, let's give equal time for any religion or any idea.
Right.
And as we've seen, that's kind of what's happened in Oklahoma City with the Satanist monument. Well, I just want to bring up really quickly for everybody at home, while that was something to kind of scoff at, and I think, Joe, you called it ridiculous, right after that, the local Hindus said, hey, that's a good point.
Open the door.
The state has only endorsed a Christian perspective at this time. We would like you to endorse one of ours, and their statue was basically a man. And then I won't go into more details other than that, but that's typically what their statues are, or of a human, and that's about it. But you know, that opens the door, as you said, for everyone else, and then that brings us kind of back to our history, which we pointed out with Baptist. And it was a Baptist who complained about the...
And the Baptists at that time, many of them voted for Thomas Jefferson because he was promoting their church-state separation. And that may be how Jefferson got elected. So many of those kinds of people voted for him. They understood that he was supporting their religious liberty.
Right. And I wanted to go on about this strategy. And sometimes it fails and sometimes it succeeds. But what ultimately happens, as in we're about to hit the holiday season, same thing with Christmas type monuments and whatnot. Then everyone gets a lottery to see which groups get to put up their religious ideas on state property that year. And then it turns out to offend the majority who had been previously running the game for 10 years or more. And then they say, you know what, let's just make it neutral and not let anyone do this. I mean, it happens all the time in this fashion.
And we know that Benjamin Franklin held the view of religious liberty, and that if people wanted to promote their religion on a piece of property, they could do so as long as it was the property they bought and paid for and not public property. And that seems to me to be fair. In other words, if there's a beer company who wants to promote their beer on their private property, that's
called advertising when you promote your product, right?
And
it's free.
And I don't have to buy their beer, but if that's what they want, that's their business. Don't do it on public property.
Right. And well, more to the point for advertising.
Same of a religion. Don't do it on public property.
If the state is entangled, you have just a scary amount of support there. Even if no one had complained, you now have a state entangled. I mean, are you really going to be responsible to your citizens if you're only allowing one endorsement of one particular religion?
Let's get back to specifically secular strategies. And the broader topic is reason used to resolve conflicts. And our speaker has some background and knowledge in Protestants, the word Protestant itself.
That's right. We
Talk
protest.
to us about that.
As I understand it, Protestantism began when a number of practicing Catholics found the practices and business of conducting religion to be offensive in the church and challenged it. The most famous one being, I guess, Martin Luther, who was appalled by the selling of indulgences, which enable people to get out of purgatory if someone would buy an indulgence. And the church was using this money to build, I think, St. Peter's in Rome. He argued, though, against that on the grounds that there was no scriptural basis for it. So here we have a religious difference. And I think later in his life, Luther did regret somewhat the way he overstated his case or stated it in really strong negative ways.
But he got invective a little bit.
But Protestantism spread all over Europe in the 16th century, and it caused an enormous amount of strife. And part of the reasons it spread, as I understand it, were political. So part of them were religious.
Why was it partly political and religious?
Because a number of the rulers in the various kingdoms, especially in the German area that we now call Germany, were unhappy with the amount of power that the church exercised over both the rulers and the people. And most of us, I think, have learned in our history classes how the Episcopal Church got started, the Church of England, when Henry VIII couldn't get a divorce. And what he did was he yanked the church out of the Catholic orbit and set himself up as the head of the church.
Yeah, he had to.
So there was a Protestant church came out of a king's action, whereas the other Protestants came out of initially some priests, but also a lot of other people taking their religion seriously, and not really being in agreement with how the established church was promoting and sustaining their religion. So we had this really very difficult time that lasted for 200-300 years. In which a lot of people got killed, and a lot of people got mistreated, all in the name of somewhat true religion, according to someone's definition.
So you had a strong movement of Lutheranism in Germany.
Right.
And then over in France you had
John Calvin.
Right. And then over in England you had the Church of England, what became the Church of England.
And then you had the people, like we mentioned, the Baptists, and we had all kinds of little groups. I mean, Protestantism led to many different points of view, many different groups.
The Baptists in England were kicked out and had to go to what today we'd call the Netherlands. And that was about 1620.
And the Puritans, who came here allegedly for religious freedom, really came here to practice religion they wanted, and they were as intolerant as the people that wouldn't let them practice their religion.
In fact, they kicked the Baptists out of New England, same as the English did. We got
a caller.
Another caller coming in. Please go ahead.
Oh, we may have lost him. Caller, are you there? Hello, caller. Are you?
We lost him.
Lost him.
Well, encourage our caller to call back.
Yeah, call right back. Not sure what happened there. But,
the previous caller was making a point, and we don't want to make it to make it obscure. He was trying to say, from his point of view, he believes, he interprets the Bible, that the Bible has one God and God never changes, and therefore ethics doesn't change, and because it's a kind of a digest of the mind of God. So if you want to know what God is thinking on these matters, just read the Bible, because from his point of view, it's an inerrant or infallible revelation straight from heaven.
Right. Now, that creates a big problem for anybody who might have a different opinion.
Well, it created a problem among Christians because obviously you have to...
Christianity merges out of Judaism, and there's some disagreement here about what God has done. Has God changed? But I think there are accounts even in the Old Testament where it seems like that some of the Jewish prophets talked with God and got God to change his mind.
Well,
or I don't know what pronoun should we use for God.
Well, there were certainly two sets of commandments, or at least there were lots of commandments.
Well, there is that passage.
But it's been a traditional view, though, that God doesn't change. But I don't know if that's as much in the Bible as it is in medieval theology.
That's medieval theology brought partly out of Plato and Aristotle, I think.
Yeah, that was...
But I think that's not biblical so much. For example, in Genesis, you have the story. Now let me try to draw the picture from Orthodox Christian point of view, interpreting Genesis 6. The Lord God of the universe knew what he was doing way ahead of time before he created the universe. Now this is an Orthodox Christian viewpoint. And he made...
Looks like we got our caller back.
He made the human race.
Let's take the caller.
And then he wiped it out. And he says he regretted he had ever made. Go ahead, our caller. Come back.
Hello, caller. You're live.
Go ahead.
This is Charles from Central Illinois.
Oh, hey, Charles.
From Illinois. Good.
Yes, secular strategies.
Uh-huh.
You brought up some of the ones I like most, the lack of historical information that people have, and how they won't hear about certain things either in school or in the church meetings, church socializations, and so forth. For instance, in Indiana, from the 1840s to 1976, it was literally a law that you could hunt down and kill Mormons, members of the Latter-day Saints.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And how the 30 Years' War was exasperated by the Protestant Catholic problems, and how the whole mess of problems was initiated when the Edict of Tolerance by Constantine was essentially overruled by the Roman Emperor Flavius Tiberius in favor of and only of a specific brand of Christianity.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Who was it that thought that they could kill Mormons, and why?
That was the dominant Protestant sect of Indiana at that time. I believe they were Baptists, but I cannot state that positively.
That's certainly contrary to Baptist tradition, isn't it?
Yes. Like I said, I cannot state that positively. But you might point out to a lot of people, for instance, that there is a Baptist church and a Southern Baptist church. And the reason why there are two separate churches in that regard was over the question of slavery, which led to the Civil War.
Well, in about 1990s, the Southern Baptists, big split in the Southern Baptists took place. You have what now is called the moderate Baptists, mostly in the South. And they are greatly different from Southern Baptists today. And yet they're both groups calling themselves Baptists.
And they're also in Northern Baptist Church?
They're called American Baptists. Yeah. So what we're trying to say is that people inherit views. It's our species. We inherit views, and then we realize we have to make modifications and changes. And that includes changes of views of God.
And that's one of the problems I have with that first caller, Al. He went from he was a completely different mindset over several things that he did in the Old Testament, and it reversed himself several times.
Right.
So how could an unchanging deity do that?
Yeah, to be fair to his point, he was saying the deity just does not change. Now, he did acknowledge that people do change about their view of the deity.
Right.
Yeah,
but I was arguing that even in the Bible, you have a good examples, it seems to me, of the deity changing. When a deity says that, and in fact, the King James translation, which he quotes, by the way, says that God repented that he had made man. And that's the King James translation. Most translations say he regretted. One translation says he bitterly regretted that he had made man. Another says he was sorry that he had made man. My point is that this is the kind of language that sounds like he recognized in this text now. He made a mistake, and he changed.
And that's one of the things that I find most annoying is that a lot of the people you will talk to will brush such things under the rug.
That's right there in the text.
Now, my question
would be this. If this deity who presumably knew everything ahead of time before he created, did he know that this Adam and Eve was going to mess up the works in the first place? And if so, why did he create them? Was there no other plan? A good engineer or designer would have said, that's on the drawing board. That Adam and Eve won't work. He's going to screw up the whole works.
Yeah.
So let's come up with another. That's what.
Yeah, and I'm still trying to figure out how he gets by with the making of his greatest angel, the light bringer, who becomes Satan. You know, it's like, didn't he know ahead of time?
Well, according to the theology, he did. Furthermore, what's interesting, now that Satan's already here, why would he be, if he is not going to be converted, and that's Orthodox theology, if he's not going to be converted, why is he not incarcerated rather than turned loose on parole to do all this evil, presumably? In other words, what we're saying, this theology has a lot of holes in it.
But pointing these out will sometimes work. But for secular strategies, pointing out how people use and misuse and distort and ignore parts of the biblical texts of the different, the times, the Catholics and so forth, versus the St. James and so forth, is a way of pointing out, why didn't God make it absolutely clear? Since we have all these different variations.
Right. That's a good trait to have in leadership. Clear and concise language and direction. That's a good trait for a leader.
Well, one of the traditions is, well, he made it clear in Greek and Hebrew. Unfortunately, most of the world can't read Greek and Hebrew.
Right.
So
Classical Greek and ancient Hebrew are not exactly widespread languages these days.
Oh, sir.
Unless you happen to be in a linguistics department of a university or something.
Well, as a matter of fact, in the time of Jesus, most people in the land of Jesus, most people couldn't even read. About 6% could, maybe. So,
and the vast majority of the people in what we now call the Palestine area didn't even speak the classic Hebrew. They spoke Aramaic. That was the widest spread language of that era.
Arabic, yes.
No, Aramaic.
Aramaic, yeah.
Aramaic.
Yeah.
So, and we don't have any of the Aramaic texts. We have all the stuff that was derived out of classic Greek. So, if God wanted the people of Jesus' time, supposed time, to understand him, why is he using a language that most of them didn't speak?
Well, what was interesting is many people who take the King James translation to be somehow hot off the altar of heaven, we were pointing out last time, it's in the King James translation, you have the passage, if you handle snakes and drink poison, nothing will happen to you, right, if you're a believer. And then we were pointing out, in the King James translation, you have it, but in most translations you don't, because the better Greek manuscripts don't. So you don't have just one Greek manuscript.
You have several.
Yeah, we don't have the originals. See, we
have copies of copies of copies.
We just have copies of copies of copies. So we have to piece it all together. And hope.
I understand that the number of the beast in one fragment used today is 666, but in another one it's 616. So which one is correct?
My Uncle Charlie thought it was Mussolini.
Mussolini was the beast?
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for calling in and helping us from Illinois.
Thanks a lot, Charles.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You know, another thing, when we find out new things about these Gospels, like I was looking at the Gnostic Gospel of Judas that was recovered, right? This is Coptic language, which is some type of, maybe you can help me here, Egyptian, and that's the only form we have it in. Well, you can't just.
And the gospel.
Most Christians won't let you just add that to their books.
Well, the Gospel of Thomas would be a good example.
Right.
Well, now let me ask you this.
So,
you mentioned Luther, and you mentioned Calvin, and then, of course, you had John Knox over in Scotland. What do you think was going on during this time now? I mean, here, you know, we like to think we're sensible people trying to deal with what they inherited as their.
I agree. I think they were trying to do the best they could with how they understood the religion and the very events of their day, and they're coming up with different answers about how the religion ought to operate.
And that sounds like you and me, doesn't it?
It sounds like human beings all the time, everywhere.
Yeah.
we're doing that in our own rationalist movement now.
Doing
We got
our own
lots of
rationalist movement. Yeah,
got
and
lots
it'll-
of different ideas coming up, and we're
No
shooting them
matter
down.
what group of human beings you get together to talk about anything, there are going to be substantial differences, and that's why. Maybe that's why one of the Beatitudes is "Blessed are the peacemakers."
I like that, yeah. Because otherwise we would be able to.
They have to fight all the time. We wouldn't be able to agree or disagree.
So in that sense, we here at this moment are in the tradition of those people who are trying to take what they inherited and reinterpreting it in light of our experiences and what new things we learn.
I think so.
And trying to make sense of it and try to live in a moral, responsible way, in a respectful way,
I think so.
and learning how to disagree with each other and learn from each other.
Right. And maybe learning that it's just not, maybe it's unethical to force or try to force other people to believe and think the way you do.
Yeah.
Period. Because you know you're right.
Are you saying might does not make right?
Might does not make right, nor does intense conviction make right.
Yeah.
I mean, if intense conviction made right, the Nazis were right, and so were the kamikaze pilots. I mean, fanatics.
Yeah.
Are they right because they're willing to die for what they think?
No. Wouldn't think so.
I guess another strategy, though, for our church-state issue, since we started with that, is to incorporate faith-based groups, other religions, in our fights and our battles. I mean,
Yes.
certainly.
That's a good point. Good point. Real good.
Sometimes I don't think we actually hinder that too much. So maybe some of the stronger language and the stronger characters in the atheist movement that we've seen might not care for that, or might criticize people who would otherwise be our allies.
Yeah,
in these
exactly.
fights.
That's a good point.
But I'm thinking of the National Center for Science Education that I don't know if Eugenie Scott is still the president of, but you know, they work with arguments against creation and keeping science in the science classroom, that sort of thing. Well, they use allies from all over the place. Kenneth Miller, who's a Catholic biologist, wrote one of the biology texts that was used a great deal. I want to say in the late 2000s, up to about 2009 or 10. You know, he's a, I guess theological evolutionist, right?
Yeah.
And of course, he understands biology fairly well. So they've used these things, and we use them in the similar way that we've got the ACLU, which fights for just everyone's liberties,
Civil liberties in general.
Yeah.
But
So there's,
I mean, there's not a lot of malice here, but every now and then you get carried away, and
that's a good point, and I've used the word fundamentalist atheist, and we got to watch about that. A fundamentalist about that, I mean, it says not only am I wrong, I can't listen to anybody else because I'm so right, I can't learn from anybody. And I think it's a mistake for an atheist to say, there's nothing I could learn from the tradition of Buddhism.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have learned an enormous amount watching the Apostle Paul wrestle with his problem, dealing with James there in Jerusalem and Peter, and then coming from and he's dealing with the question of the Torah, the law, and grace. And that's the very same problem, it seems to me, that a community has, where you've got to have law, and you've got to have structure, but you've got to have grace and forgiveness. Every community is good. And it seems to me Paul is brilliant. Now, he has his theological wrappings,
Right.
just as we do. But when you see the way he works through this, I think we can learn a heck of a lot from this in a secular society on how to relate.
I would agree. It's certainly right now.
To prisoners.
Because we've got a few movements. J.T. Eberhardt, who blogs on Pathos Blogs, I'll post that on our Facebook for anybody who wants to know more about that, had made a comparison. There are schools of thought, and you get these dictionary atheists, and then you've got these other atheists in the movement who, a dictionary atheist, as an example, would be someone, just as Larry Rhodes would say on the show, if you don't believe in a God, that's you. End of story. Then you've got this other group that thinks, well, you can't be a part of this movement if you don't think, if you're not a vegan. I've actually heard that one. There's certainly a lot of interest in sexism right now, and there's some people who think you can't be a part of this movement if you have any trace of sexism about you, cultural or otherwise,
I gotcha.
or racism. And we need to address this in a way that we're all on the same side of the line at the end of the day. We're all on the same team. And in fact, we've got religious people that are on our side.
Exactly.
And we've got to use them because...
I think the ACLU president is a minister, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And granted, we have our differences, but what we've got to do is learn to criticize each other in a way that doesn't cause us to go at each other's throats.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I think we're not talking about actual violence here, and even with religions, we haven't really gotten to violence yet. What I'm talking about is going at each other's throats in a courtroom, disrupting legal battles that would otherwise, they don't do anything.
Well, a good example
at the end of the day
is one of the propositions we have here in Knoxville. I think it's proposition, well, I've forgotten which one. It starts off with notwithstanding.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that you ought to be able to read some kind of proposition to vote on that at least by the second time you read it, you could understand it.
You're talking about the amendments.
Yeah, the amendments.
Amendment 1, is that the one that...
Yeah,
it's popping up all over the place. So
yes on one, no on one.
Right, it's all over
everywhere.
the place. That's because apparently that's all you need to know is what someone told you to say.
Yeah. Right. Thanks to Pauline Hamilton, who took time to study and give us a good, clear example of.
Yeah.
If you want to make up your own mind about your own body, if you're a woman, vote no on that, and otherwise vote yes.
You want the legislature to make up its mind about your body, you vote for vote
yes.
To our viewers,
Thanks,
we did a show on that, and also NPR did a special, discussed pros and cons depending on where you fall politically. All that stuff is usually available online. You could probably listen to that if you wanted more information on it. I liked it. I've been listening in the mornings. Yeah. I liked it.
Yeah, the East Tennessee Rationalist Group had a good discussion on that.
Yeah.
One Sunday, and I was very appreciative of their.
All right, I guess it's time to wrap up.
Okay.
Get out your pen and paper. This has been a Free Thought Forum program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm John Clark.
Yeah, I'm Joe Barnhart. And
I'm Phil Hamlin.
And we want to thank you for joining us. The Rationalists of East Tennessee have several regularly monthly meetings, don't forget. And by rational, we mean it's open discussion on the topic, and we take time to listen to each other, which is harder sometimes than our presenting our views.
Yeah, don't just empathize. I mean, actually, empathy is important, but you need to understand your opponent's argument as well.
Yeah. In fact, good empathy, would you say, has to be a lot of understanding.
Yeah, I can tell that you're mad over there. Let's actually talk about
why you're mad.
Yeah, why you're mad, because empathy alone, it's a hard trait to have, but it's not enough.
Will you come back sometime when, say, talk about the book of Galatians, and because I know you've taught philosophy of religion.
I have, but I've never taught anything about the book of Galatians.
Okay, well, you can talk. You talked on the problem of evil.
Yeah, that's true.
And you could come with us and talk again on that problem.
I could do that, yeah. What about those Galatians, though? I don't know.
Well, we'll have to make a...
well, Paul has a view that what I think is kind of, well, it's time we got to go. So we want to thank our readers.
Thanks for watching and listening.
Thanks.
Yeah.